Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today is our end of the year show. And joining me is a person that I've had the pleasure of doing this with for a number of years now. Please welcome Paula Loop, who's the leader of PwC's Governance Insight Center. So welcome, Paula.
Thank you.
So once again, we're going to be talking about the top challenges facing boards in 2021. And honestly, I don't think there's ever been a year that's been tougher to sort of select the ones to talk about, because there's just so much happening that's certainly going to extend into 2021. But as is usually the case, I am going to give you the right of first naming. So what's the first issue or challenge or governance issue that you see for boards in 2021?
Sure. Thank you, TK. And you are right. There is a long list, I'm sure, for every board. But I think ESG has to absolutely be one of the top topics. I think at this point, most boards, most companies are really getting their arms around what does it mean? What does ESG mean for them and so forth? And we continue to hear from institutional investors about the focus in this area. There was a lot of focus, discussion around S earlier in the year from the social aspects, so environmental, social, and governance. But I think now that we've rounded out the year and we've stabilized a bit on some of the workforce and pandemic issues, they're circling back and really digging in on climate. And I think one of the things that's interesting is many companies feel that this isn't necessarily a space for them. If you're not in the energy business or some other areas, you might say that environmental or climate isn't really an area of focus, and therefore they're hesitant to take some next steps around ESG. But I guess my real point here is to say, well, hang on a second. I think every company really needs to step back and think about what they've already got out there related to ESG data and metrics. There's raters out there that have already provided an ESG rating for more or less every company. They're combing your website. They're looking at your corporate responsibility report. They're looking at your regulatory filings. And they're finding and determining data about you related to some kind of ESG scoring or something. So I think that boards and companies really need to just step back and take a look at what that is saying about them, what's the messaging that's coming out, and try to figure out, does that link back to the company's purpose, to the business drivers for the company? Is that the message that you want your company to be portraying? And if not, I think now is the time, and in most cases it probably won't be. I think now is the time to do something. It's just really no longer acceptable, I think, to step back and do nothing related to ESGs. So I would say boards, first and foremost, figure out what is out there already on your company, understand the position you're in, and think about putting your toe in the water and driving your own messaging in 2021.
Well, no real surprise. My number one included ESG as well. And, Paula, it was interesting on your director survey this year, and it was done probably a little earlier, in the year, but that it showed that there was still a gap between how directors felt and how investors felt. And while I think that gap has closed a little bit with all the publicity and pressure and upgrades in how to measure it, I do think there's still a gap that has to be closed. And if directors don't feel that and pay more attention to it, there's a good chance that certain companies can be left behind, and they're going to raise sort of a lot of focus on themselves, from whether it's a proxy advisor or BlackRock or State Street or whatever it is. I'm going to expand just a tad on yours, because I think that ESG is just part of what I call the perfect storm. And the perfect storm includes, in addition to ESG, includes corporate purpose, and includes stakeholder capitalism. So it sort of creates this challenge between the three. All of them are interrelated, in the sense of what a board is going to have to deal with. And you put them all together, and it's one of the bigger challenges that will exist that we've had a chance to talk about at a time like this. So there's no question that all that is really going to be on everybody's agenda in 2021. So good first selection.
Absolutely. All right, should I go to my second one?
Why don't you do that?
Okay. So my second one is board effectiveness, and I'm going to be cheating a little bit here because I've got three subcomponents to my board effectiveness comment. The first one is really around board diversity. I think that, given what's going on with legislation in states like California and others, what the NASDAQ proposal is talking about, that's before the SEC, and then we're not sure yet what the Biden administration is going to bring forward. I think boards really need to focus on their diversity and take a look and make sure you've got the appropriate gender and underrepresented minority representation on the board. I think this is something that if you get at it pretty quickly, you're going to have a broader pool of candidates to choose from. So I believe it's an immediate imperative, I would say. And as when you think about it, a lot of boards really to address this immediately have been increasing the size of their board. And just to go back to a point that Julie Dahm from Spencer Stewart made on your show a couple of weeks ago, I don't think it's really sustainable for boards to continue to just expand the size of their board in order to address some of the diversity issues. So that brings me to my second point around board effectiveness, which is that boards need to continue to focus on board assessments and making sure that each director is bringing the right value to the table. I realize that this is very hard and challenging and takes really strong board leadership to really focus on this kind of refreshment, but I think it continues to need to be done. And then my third little subcomponent here is around board materials. I think board materials are really going to be helpful to boards to help them be more effective when they get in the room, less presentation, more discussion. And in particular, what we're seeing is there's a lot more things that are data centric that boards are monitoring. So for example, the company's diversity and where they are getting themselves grounded in facts. That's a lot of data for boards to digest and monitor and look at it on a regular basis. There's data around ethics and compliance. There's data around internal audit oversight. And I think all of that data really could be presented very consistently to the board on a 1 to 3 page, dashboard type presentation. And in fact, unfortunately, what I see a lot of is 20 to 30 PowerPoint pages that have all this data spread throughout, and the board ends up getting more of a presentation versus a level set on facts and then time for a discussion. So I think there's room for improvement there to help the board focus on being more effective.
Well, those are all great points. And I like your little trick of your subcomponents on how you expand the topics that you get to. So I'm going to do the same thing, but I only have one subcomponent.
Okay.
But my next one is something that would have been back, if we go back 2 years ago and look at this show, was our number one, and that is digital transformation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when you see how the pandemic changed the way that businesses have to look at themselves, it's like pouring gasoline on a fire on how fast digital transformation now is happening within companies. And again, here's another case where competitively and strategically, you can't just wait around. You have to find out what components of your business can be adapted to fit digital transformation, particularly if you're dealing with customers these days. It's just, the kinds of conversations that are going on in companies now where you're looking to where to spend your dollars to reach employees or I'm sorry, employees and customers, is all digital. Okay, they're using Facebook ads, they're using whatever, even to the extent of dropping out of TV and finding other methods to use. So digital transformation is going to be just reemerge as a critical topic. And my little sub thing that I have, which is the Paula Loop trick, I'm going to add cyber to that because cyber's got pushed aside. Cyber risk has gotten pushed aside by all that's happening everywhere else. Well, guess what? I think this year we are going to see some just terrible threats in cyber. I mean, we saw in the news recently about the state sponsored Russia attacking that. I just think it's going to get worse. And so I would be very sensitive if I was a board today to doing what you can do in protecting the assets of your corporation. So that's my little one that I wanted to squeeze in there because I think it's so important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, both of your ones that you just went through, I think between the digital transformation and cyber kind of fit nicely in my third topic. So my third suggestion, I think for boards that they're going to need to focus on is just flat out emerging stronger from this pandemic and taking advantage of the learnings. And I think the things that we did learn, look, everybody learned something. You know, boards learned how to have virtual board meetings and be very productive. We learned how employees could work remotely. We learned lots of different things, but I think any board member that's sitting on the board of a company where the executive team keeps saying, I can't wait till we get back to normal and go back to how we used to do things, I think is really missing the opportunity that this pandemic has afforded us. And that includes things like thinking about occasionally having virtual board meetings. I think we've all learned we don't have to fly around the country and meet in person as the only way to get business done. We've also learned that certain employees can work remotely all the time. Maybe most employees can work remotely, occasionally or a couple of days a week or something. So we've learned that we should be adapting the way our people work so that then we can broaden the talent pool and have access to people that maybe previously we wouldn't have had access to. And then back to your point about technology, I think we all learned technology is super important. We've seen a huge acceleration, as you mentioned, to the digital transformation agenda, not only for efficiency within organizations, but as you mentioned, for interacting and reaching your customers and really enhancing and developing those relationships. So, and of course, once you get into any of that technology and digital stuff, I absolutely agree with you that cyber stuff is going to be on the rise. I think all of us have been aware of that and seen that over the last several months, but it's absolutely going to continue into the future. So I guess my final point is don't let your companies go back to what was normal. Try to push them forward to really be opportunistic about this pandemic and take something really positive from it and change the way they're doing things.
All great points. And I think this has been one of the most engaging opportunities that I think we've had, Paula, to talk about issues. And there's so many that we could still talk about. Human capitalism,
Yeah.
there's just a lot of things that boards are going to have to face. So it's going to be interesting this year. I did want to mention, outside of everything, that anybody that knows how the big four accounting firms work, they have these mandatory retirement. And I understand that when we look forward to 2021, you're sort of looking forward to it because it's the year that you will get the opportunity to start a next career, which I hope for you will be some interesting board opportunities. Because when you think of the boardrooms you've been in, the audit committees that you've oversaw, and then all the time that you spent in corporate governance, any company would be lucky to have somebody with experience as you are. So I'm sure we'll be talking with you, but I wanted to wish you luck in 2021, and just thank you again for all that you've contributed to this show.
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed working with you. I've enjoyed the governance space, and I am looking forward to my next chapter. So thank you very much.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.